Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2026 Minnesota Pork Congress. We're pleased to kick off today's seminars with an update on the Taste What Pork Can Do consumer campaign, an important effort focused on strengthening demand for pork through retail and food service engagement. Please join me in welcoming Jose De Jesus, AVP of Consumer Marketing, and Neal Hull, Director of Domestic Market Development for the National Pork Board, who will share campaign highlights, early results, and what's ahead as we build momentum into 2026. Join me in welcoming to the stage.
Need a clicker. Good morning. Full house. Yeah, forward. Okay. Well, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and kind of walk you through some of the work that we're doing at the National Pork Board as it relates to the consumer campaign. So today I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing. I'm also going to talk about performance. I know that's important. And then kind of where we're going in 2026 with this effort. So, excuse me. So I'll walk you through that, and then my colleague Neal will talk to you guys a little bit about the work that he's leading in the retail space as well in the food service space. So I'll start with a quick story. So a couple years ago, my colleague Kirsten Hafer, she leads the business intelligence team, and she said to me, hey, I got to talk to you about something. I want to show you some data. So I was very excited because I was thinking like maybe she's going to show me some trends and some things that are happening with flavors. And I get in a call with her, and she landed on this slide. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I was thinking about. And so really, it was depressing to see this, but at the same time, it was also good to understand where we are as an industry. And so when you think about the consumption of pork by generation, it was clear that we had to do something. Right? So this slide is probably embedded in a lot of the decks that we put together, that we speak about. I know I have a copy in my office, but it's always a reminder of what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to move the needle. When you think about the baby boomers, they eat quite a bit of pork, but the consumption declines as the generations get younger. So the millennials and Gen Z are struggling, right, with pork consumption. And part of that is because pork is not as relevant to them as it is to the older generation. So the challenge for us was, what are we going to do about this? And this is kind of all morphed into this idea of Taste What Pork Can Do. That was the birth of that, and something that we knew that if we're going to carry the category forward, we have to move. We have to really think about how we get that younger generation to eat pork. And as depressing as it was also a good challenge for us, for our team, for our organization to really think about how do we move the needle with the younger consumer on behalf of our industry and our producers. And so it is a reminder of the work that we do every time. So I just wanted to start with that. And then I'll start with what we're trying to accomplish. So our business objective, put simply, we need more households eating more pork more often. And when you think about that, that is actually one of the priorities that we have at the National Pork Board as well. We have 3 of them, and this is one that demands. So at the end of the day, it's about driving long-term demand for our product on behalf of our producers. So all the work that we do has to ladder up to that. We need more people eating more pork, period, and more often as well. So that is the business challenge, the business objective. Then you move into the marketing side, which is the work that I lead with my colleagues, and really is thinking about that previous slide about the younger generation not eating a lot of pork or consuming a lot of pork. And it's how do we change that? How do we create adoption of pork consumption within this group? And so that's kind of like our North Star when we're putting together marketing plans. It's with that in mind. How do we get that younger generation to really think about pork and think about it differently that perhaps they have done so in the past? And then when you think about the communication part of it, it's no secret that we're all in on flavor, and that's not going to change. Flavor is our number one attribute. Aside from price, people think about taste and flavor when they're going to consider the product. And so this is a unique opportunity, something that our industry probably has not been able to do for whatever reason, but we have not been able to focus on taste and flavor. So as the tagline implies, taste what pork can do, this is really an invitation to consumers to really think and explore about all the great things that our product has to offer and how it can be relevant in their lives. So that is kind of the setup. What we do know, our strategic approach from the data that our team have, data that our producer have invested in, we know a lot of consumers like flavors, different type of flavor. They like to discover new things. They even like bacon, pepperoni, and ham, but they don't always equate that to pork in general. So they like to discover, they love ribs, they love ham, sausage, and when you ask about it and research, they talk about like, oh yeah, I don't eat a lot of pork, but then you start bringing in the cuts, then the processed side, and there's a lot of affinity. And when you look at the penetration for processed, it's significantly higher than it is on the fresh side. So this is, in essence, our strategy here is really about if you like bacon, if you like pepperoni, if you like ham, then you like pork. Because what we're trying to do is how do we leverage the processed side of the category to elevate the fresh side of the category. So this is a whole hog approach, something we've never done before. Primarily, we've always been focused on the fresh side of the portfolio. So this is about meeting the consumer where they are, and we know there's affinity for the product. How do we get consumers to think about pork as a whole in the entire category beyond just sticking to the processed side or cuts that they're very familiar with? And to do that, we gotta reach people where they are. Our national campaign really is focused in 14 markets. That's by design. This is where most of the consumption of pork happens. These are also large markets as well. There's, with the exception of few markets there, but there's low pig production, but high population. So this is the idea of fishing where the fish are, if you will, to maximize and have greater impact in the marketplace. And then our business intelligence team also identifying they identify actually 7 segments, but 3 of them that we're focused on heavily where we feel we can make the greatest impact with the resources that we have, which is the culinary or the confident meat eater, culinary adventure, and the mindful choice maker. So it's important because while we have national dollars, it's not necessarily a national play, just identifying some of those key markets. Now, our internal team do work with states like in Minnesota to really extend the campaign farther to make sure that we are activating in these markets and really delivering the message of the brand to the consumers in these states. So there's really 2 strategies around this, and the first one is making pork cool. So most people think about this awareness side. The way I like to think about this is how do we make pork relevant to consumers? With the slide that I shared earlier around the consumption, it's clear that pork is not relevant with younger consumers. So how do we show up in some of those digital spots or places and platforms where these consumers are very active? We have to do that. If we want to be relevant, we want consumers to consider our product, then we have to make sure that we're showing up where these consumers are spending a lot of the time. And it's tricky because a lot of the activity there really focus on awareness, which is videos and social media, which is hard to quantify the ROI, but with a true marketing approach, you really have to think about the entire funnel, what we call the marketing funnel, all the way from awareness to make the product very relevant and elicit some interest in the product, all the way to the consideration and the intent of purchase of the product, which is what Make Them Drool does. So it's a combination of making the product relevant and then driving the consumers to take a specific action, and in this case, to really purchase our product at the retail space, which is where they can only purchase the product. So here's an example of some of the work that we've done in 2025 when we launched this campaign in May. So it's been about 9 months or so, still very early. But what you'll see here that it's creative, that looks very appealing, and we tested this with consumers as well to make sure that all this work was being relevant to them, that the messaging was relevant, that they wanted to hear about certain things that ultimately moved the needle and caused some sort of action for them to drive purchasing or for them to consider the product and ultimately buy the product. And so that's some of the work we've done this year. And then I'll switch real quick to the performance. So one of the things that we always do and tell our teams is whatever we do, we got to measure. We have to measure our work. We don't know if you're not measuring, you don't know if you're making a great impact or not. And so, pleased to say that our return on ad spend is 224 to 1. That's a significant number. Just for context, when you look at as a whole, benchmark is 3 to 1. If you are doing 3 to 1, 4 to 1 in return on ad spend, you're doing it well. And so for us, it's a 224, which we're seeing a lot of performance and a lot of things moving the needle, to the point that probably in 2026 we're going to benchmark against ourselves, so that we're staying aggressive and that we're making sure that 3 to 1, it's it's the benchmark out there. It is what it is, but we want to make sure that we're constantly chasing and aiming for something higher and bigger to make sure that we're driving long-term value for pork on behalf of our producers. We also looked at how is a campaign performing in campaign markets versus non-campaign markets. So think about that map that I showed earlier. There's about 14 states there. And what we found was that dollar sales at retail are up against for total pork as well for processed and fresh. And that's important because that's something that allows us to know is our marketing working and and moving the needle in some of this market where we're placing significant investment. So our team looked at that from July all the way till December 31st, and pleased to say that total pork sales are up as well as processed and fresh. And I want to thank Minnesota. I talked to Bailey about this earlier today, but none of the work that we're doing at the national level works if we don't have partners like Minnesota and other states, because this is about extending the campaign beyond the work that we're doing. So we need states, we need retailers, we need packers, we need food service. Everybody has to kind of collaborate together and make sure that we're driving the business, right? And so I want to show you this because I was very proud of the work that Minnesota have done. And here's some example of the work they've done with Cub stores and the work that they did with the University of Minnesota and some of the football players there, and really taking the work that we're doing and extending that into at the local level in Minnesota. So thank you for that. And then one thing that I took upon myself working with our business intelligence team was, well, they have been active in Minnesota, so let's look at how they're performing. And you're performing very well. We have increased household penetration, or you have increased household penetration. Trips are up, and ultimately people are spending more per trip as well. And that's overall shoppers. But then if you think about the consumer sentiment, the mindful choice maker that I know Bailey and team are very focused on, it's a great story. Household penetration up 1-2%. Trips have been up, and almost $8 more spent per trip every time they're purchasing pork. So it's a really great story and a testament to the work that the team at the Minnesota Pork Board is doing to really elevate long-term demand on behalf of your producers here. So where are we going in 2026? The business objective doesn't change. We need more people eating more pork more often. That's going to be the constant there. We need the younger consumers to eat more pork and consider our product. That's not going to change. I think the biggest change, is we're trying to go into spaces where people are, trying to identify cultural moments where pork can fit as part of their lifestyle. So think about the fitness space, or working with athletes that when they get done working out, they need nutrient-dense protein, or they need to recover. Pork is a great option for that. So we're trying to identify some of these moments where consumers are, whether it's gaming or something like that, where the younger consumers are, and how do we show up differently? And the goal is simple. How do we become relevant to the consumers in order to bring them to the category long term? So for 2026, there's obviously 4 quarters in the year, but we felt if we can streamline that a little bit and shorten that and focus on 3 seasons, we could be more impactful and effective with the dollars that we have. So Q1 in 2026, flavor leads the way. It starts with flavor, it ends with flavor. That's not going to change. But there's an opportunity to really talk about nutrition. You think about at the end of the year in 2025, people are thinking about, some healthy habits and things like that. You also have Heart Month in February. You also have Nutrition Month in March. So how do we show up differently there? So how do we talk about flavor, complete protein, nutrient dense, those kind of topics for Q1? And then from there, moving on to summer grilling. We know summer grilling is critical for our business. For chops, particularly in ribs. So we're going to extend that probably starting April all the way to September. So a little bit longer season. It also makes sense because while maybe Minnesota might be a little bit cold, then there are other places where we're activating at the national level where people are still grilling or are grilling year round, right? So I think that's a huge opportunity for us to extend that season to be a little bit longer and put some dollars behind our outreach in that moment. And then we have, and focus also flavor and versatility, right? Versatility is important. It's one of the attributes that we have to move the needle in. So we're pairing that flavor and versatility for the summer grilling. And then we move into the gathering. This is about the holidays, right? Where it's comfort food and there's this nostalgia about the product. Well, it's about how do we continue to emphasize flavor, but then about convenience and ease of use, and how do we get ideas for consumers to really think about the product, not just for dinner, right? Because at the end of the day, we really have to affect all day part. This is about breakfast, this is about lunch, this is about dinner, this is about snacking. And I think with all the gatherings that are happening, there's a huge opportunity for us to focus on that. And so that is the approach that we have for 2026. I talked a little bit about the lifestyle. How do we identify those cultural moments where consumers are doing the things that matter to them most, and how do we show up there differently in order to become relevant? And then ground pork. Ground pork has a huge opportunity right now. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. If you look at the price of our, call it other ground meats, there's a huge opportunity. So we put a strategy together late last fall, started deploying it in December, and we have this always on approach for ground pork throughout the whole year. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's a huge opportunity to talk about affordability, value, all those things that make sense when you go to the meat case and you're seeing, $4 a pound for ground pork versus $8. Our other competitors, I think there's a huge opportunity for consumers to really think about ground pork differently. So we're putting a lot of emphasis there in 2026, and probably depend. We'll look at the market and see how things are doing, but just want to call that out. And then the measurement and accountability, everything that we do, and I talked about that, we got to measure. If something's not working, we're going to stop doing it. If we fail fast, move it over. And then we're going to be holding each other accountable for the work that we're doing to make sure we're driving results for our producers. So for Q1 this year, these are ads that are in market right now. Think about complete protein, ground pork. I just talked about that. These are things that are very important right now. These are ads that are driving consumers to some of the bigger players in terms of retail. So think about the Walmarts of the world, Kroger, Albertsons, Publix, etc. So a lot of these ads that you're seeing here are driving consumers to those retailers in order to buy pork. So applying the focus that I was talking about for Q1 around nutrition and flavor, all those things are happening in market right now and will continue to be the case all the way till April. And then ground pork, I'll touch on this again. There's a huge opportunity for the affordability message here. We're actually working with our teams to really think about pork and how do we create content, whether it's influencers, whether it's our own content, about encouraging consumers to swap in. Put in ground pork versus the other ground meats. I think there's a huge opportunity. We're also talking about budget-friendly meals that people can cook with $15. You get a pound or two of ground pork and maybe get some lettuce and do some lettuce wraps, right? I mean, there's a huge opportunity now with inflation and things that are going on, the price of everything going on. So I think there's a good opportunity to give consumers ideas of how to work with ground pork in a very budget-friendly manner. So we're doing that. And then we have some consumer brand PR that we're activating with our agency partner as well, making sure that the message of ground pork is getting seen and it's being talked about to expand that message across the markets that we're active. And then Packer support. We have a team, a channel team, and we have somebody, Kevin, that kind of works with the Packers. So the idea here is how do we work with the Packers to make sure they're emphasizing ground pork? Because we can't do it alone, right? We need everybody working together to make sure they're prioritizing ground pork. Same thing that Neal's doing, and he's going to talk about that shortly here. But how do we prioritize ground pork, not just from a national buy, but also at retail, food service, and the Packer community as well. And then I'll shift a little bit. We launched the campaign in May 2025, and that was kind of the first phase of it. Still early in the game, right? It's been 9 months. But one thing that we're looking at to introduce next year, or next month, I should say, is this Hispanic approach into the marketplace. So everything that we do has to align to the brand, to Taste What Pork Can Do. And we've done some Hispanic marketing in the past, but we paused it for a little bit, really thought about what should our strategy be now in terms of what we have going on with Taste What Pork Can Do. And we landed on this. We landed on the fact that, we need a strategy that focuses more on Mexican consumers, Mexican-American consumers, because they make the largest part of the community, right? So you see almost 64 million Hispanics in this country. About 60 to 65 of them are Mexican-Americans, right? So then we look at the map thinking about, all right, so which markets do we got to focus on? And we identify, based on the resources that we have, that there's about 5 key markets that we need to really think about if we want to move the needle with this consumer. So think about markets like Dallas, Houston, LA, San Antonio, Phoenix, Chicago. So those are some of the markets that we're thinking about to really drive this campaign in those markets. But one thing I want to call out is the buying power. It's a $4 trillion buying power that this consumer have. And if Latinos in this country were their GDP is larger than many other countries in the world. So think about it. It will be, their buying power is the 5th largest in the world, bigger than Mexico alone, bigger than Spain, bigger than Russia, bigger than India. So most people don't know that, but there's money to be spent there. And honestly, Hispanics are critical to our industry. Many of them work in farms. They're part of our industry. They love your product, so there's an affinity there. They over-index in consumption. And so there's a huge opportunity for our industry to really capitalize on that. And speaking of that, any measure you look at, they consume more pork than non-Hispanics. From total pork, they keep it on hand more often than non-Hispanic consumer. So this is not about trying to get consumers to try pork, right? Because they're already over-indexing in the product. This is about how do we get them to explore the product farther. And something we haven't done, we were so focused on the fresh side. So now what we're trying to do is, how do we bring the whole hog portfolio into the mix here? So we're talking about processed and fresh, and really aligns nicely with the work that we're doing with the brand. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Neal. He's going to talk a little bit about food service and retail, and then there will be some time for questions. Thank you.
Good morning. I feel like I'm at church. Everybody's in the back. Neal Hall at the Pork Board, Director of Domestic Market Development. I'm a fellow Minnesotan. I live in Austin, so it's good to be here with you today and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing. And I'm going to reiterate what Jose said. It's all about how do we get more households eating more pork more often. More households eating more pork more often. I say that line every time I'm in front of a group of packers and when I'm in front of a retailer, when I'm in front of a food service operator, because that's really what it boils down to. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do we deliver that message at the point of purchase, because really that retailer and that food service operator is that critical piece in the supply chain. That's right where our consumer will engage with our product, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And really, I wanted to touch base on what we're doing at the National Pork Board, and Jose mentioned it, how we need the support, right? We need state marketing support, and Minnesota's done an unbelievable job between Bailey and Pam and Kate and the team here. You guys have really stepped up to the plate. Then we need that retailer and food service, and then we need the packer community. So this campaign was built over about 18 months, and we had what we called a marketing advisory group, which included producers, which included state associations, which included packer processors. And really what we didn't want to do is create a campaign in a vacuum in Clive, Iowa, and then bring it out to the marketplace. We wanted to be able to hit the ground running, and that's really why it was critical to take this process. But at the end of the day, it all lands in the consumer. We know more about the consumer today than we have ever had. And I remember when I started with the Pork Board almost 8 years ago, I did a presentation in front of a group of retailers, and the title of my slide was The Need for Change. I didn't have any data to back it up. I just, from industry experience, I thought the consumer's changing, the retail meat case hasn't. Well, today we've got the data to back that up. And a lot of the conversations with retailers today are about assortment. It's all about merchandising. It's all about the approach of pricing. Because we know one thing, I know producers don't like to see $1.99 pork loins or $1.49 butts. We're really trying to figure out how do we get to elevate that pricing experience at retail, and part of it is that mindset. We've got to shift it to be relevant, as Jose said, to that younger consumer. I did a demonstration at Iowa Pork Congress. We did a fabrication, and I talk a lot about, I have 2 millennial daughters that don't know what to do with a pork butt. And then we had an air fryer sitting there, right? A pork butt doesn't fit in an air fryer, doesn't work in an air fryer. I couldn't get the lid off of the air fryer. So gal from Iowa Pork came over and took the lid off, and then I demonstrated that it didn't fit, and then she goes, give me the mic. And she goes, younger consumers don't know how to use big cuts of meat, and she goes, and older consumers don't know how to open an air fryer or an Instant Pot. So that's one of the things where we continually challenge the retailer to think different about how they merchandise. Now, having been on the packer side, I know it's a sell it or smell it business, so we've still got product to push through the system, but there's a lot of work going on in the space of thinking about the assortment. I wanted to touch base, Jose talked about the national campaign in those markets where we're really driving traffic to the big players, and we mentioned some of the retailers. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing more on a localized basis. And Hy-Vee is such a great retailer. They've got 280, 300 stores. But I will tell you, Jason Pride is one of the biggest supporters of the work that you guys do each and every day on the farm. We had a meeting with them last week. I will say in the next couple weeks, we've got a meeting with all their district directors, right? So I can then engage Pam with the guy that covers Minnesota stores, the same in Iowa, the same in Missouri, the same in Illinois, the same in Nebraska. So it's really how do we up our game with Hy-Vee? It's a multi-state partnership, so we've got states that have really aligned with us on joining in with the support. And that's just an example of a campaign that ended yesterday that was a Super Bowl campaign. Pork was the only promotion in it, but it was all digital driven. So it was all on the mobile app for Hy-Vee, and we'll have some results on that pretty soon. But appreciate the support from Minnesota, and I will tell you we will have a campaign etched out over the rest of the year. Jose mentioned the importance of ground pork. It's part of every conversation. Jason Pride at Hy-Vee understands the opportunity for ground pork and the importance to focus on that. So Hy-Vee is just one example, but I will tell you, and I've said this in front of a lot of groups, the campaign has changed the conversation, right? We've got something new and exciting to talk about. We're relevant to their business, and retailers understand the opportunity to grow the meat case through the lens of pork. Sam's Club is another a big partner that we work closely with. This was a Super Bowl campaign. I had somebody look at it and say, well, there's chicken wings on there. Why are we promoting with wings? And I'm like, I would rather pork be part of the promotion than it just be a promotion on wings. So that was really where we aligned with the merchant at Sam's Club with ribs and chops to drive volume forward. And we will get metrics on this. I mean, it literally ended yesterday right after the Super Bowl, but we'll get metrics and we'll know what was our household penetration. Did we get new consumers? So to Jose's comment of accountability and measurement, right? We're gonna measure to make sure that the spends that we're doing are relevant. I will point out that the Sam's Club campaign was national. So if you think about our national media buy, we're driving consumers to specific retail. Sam's Club isn't one of those. So we're doing a national campaign with Sam's Club, and we've got a great partner with the merchant there. So Chicory is a company that we work with, and you think about how younger consumers consume media, right? It's all on that mobile device. So we've really honed in on this platform that then has a shoppable link. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but what I want to focus is it is a contextual platform. So that means it's all based on search terms. So somebody's looking for a recipe, and we can serve them an ad. So we can conquest other proteins. And I've got an example that I'll put up on the slide, but it's worked really, really well. We can do these specific to an individual retailer, or we can do it, and the one I'm going to share the example of is a multi-retailer type campaign. But Chicory has shoppable links with all of these retailers. So we can drive to, we've done programs specific with Kroger, we've done programs specific with Meijer, we've done programs specific with, let's say, an H-E-B in Texas, or we can do a multi-retailer campaign. So I'm going to show you kind of what that user experience is if you were to engage with this campaign. So consumers looking for a ground beef recipe. If you look down in that lower corner, there's a Discover Pork. It pops up the retailers. It adds it to the basket. And then that's now in the Target cart. You want to see it again? Because it's kind of cool. All right, let's go back. So you engage with the ad, and you can see the ad down in the corner. You click on Shop Now. It geo-targets the retailers which are within your geography. You click on the item, and it adds it to your basket. Then we get true measurement on the back side. But that is the cool part about this. And it could be a ground beef recipe. It could be a shredded chicken recipe. It could be the ability to conquest competing proteins. And from a USDA AMS standpoint, we're all friends in the barnyard, but we can conquest against those other proteins. And again, it's about making pork relevant. And it's about getting people to think different about pork. One of the things that we haven't said today, but if you notice, all of the graphics, all of the imagery is all about pork as an ingredient. You don't see a lot of center of the plate pork chops. You don't see a lot of center of the plate roast. It's all about pork as an ingredient because that's how younger consumers are engaged with the product. Another company we work with is called Ad Adapted, and they've got a similar platform, so they can target consumers that are known digital list users. So they've got a platform that's called Add to List, and this would be an experience, right? We can serve them ads in the network, out of the network. A lot of the work that we do with retailers is on-site and off-site. So think about a retailer. If you're engaged with Hy-Vee.com, you're on site. If you get an ad for Hy-Vee on a different platform, whether it's ESPN or some of those other, then that's an off-site ad. But this is just an example of where they click, they engage with the ad, and then it will add that to their digital shopping list. They also have an add to cart approach, right? So we can do it where we've got a specific retailer. So we've got a campaign in market right now that's driving traffic to Aldi. And then we've got a retailer that is multi-retailer. So there's 3 retailers that will pop up. And that's all driven by geo-targeting, geo-fenced around where that shopper's at when they get the ad and what retailers are there. I will tell you, Instant Cart will always be part of that. But then you can see in this example, it's Meijer and Walmart. So it's reaching that consumer in a space that's different, right? And pork is showing up different, and it's working really, really well. And then food service. It comes up all the time with producers that we need to focus on food service. And I will tell you, there's been a focus on food service. I'm just going to talk about a few of the things on the slide. On the left-hand slide was the pork crawl. And that was at Walt Disney World in Florida. And Maddie, I know you met Tommy Smothers at our RAC meeting. Tommy's there in the picture. We had Chef Charlie Torgerson, Patrick and I were there, and then we had 3 packers. I always approach the business as we're packer agnostic, right? I don't care if it's the big packers, the small packers. So what Tommy wanted was to bring 3 packers into the meeting. We had a big packer, a medium size, and a small. And then we just talked about pork, and we talked about pork innovation. If you ever go to Disney World, they sell a lot of pork. I mean, they're probably the largest food service operator in the country, and they continue to do things that drive consumers to the pork category, and they've been a great partner. One of the challenges with food service right now is traffic. If you talk to a food service operator, they will say, we need butts in the seats, right? Because the traffic is down, because people are strapped, the economy's tough, so they're cutting back, and I see it all the time, right? If you read the headline last week, Olive Garden is closing down Bahama Breeze. There's another operator that we were working with that filed for bankruptcy last week, Fat Brands. So it's a difficult landscape. So what a food service operator is doing is trying to figure out, how do we make our establishment exciting, and then how do we drive traffic? And they do that through LTOs, which is a limited time offer. So the example of Dickey's, that's a program that we supported last year with a hot honey pulled pork sandwich. It's not necessarily about something that's way off the charts, something that nobody's ever heard of, but it's taking a basic item like pulled pork and then adding hot honey to it. And hot honey is craze right now. If you think about Casey's and you got the hot honey pizza, Charlie Torgerson we work with, and I know Charlie works a lot with Minnesota Pork Board as well, but he used to be the executive chef at Famous Dave's. So he's worked with a lot of these chains. The other one there was from City Barbecue, and it was pork belly burn ends, right? So it's an idea of how do you elevate that experience and get traffic into the restaurant. And then one that's going on right now with Four Rivers, which is probably one of the fastest growing barbecue chains in the Southeast, with baby back ribs. Charlie last week was in Florida at a concept called Sonny's Barbecue, and he worked on a concept for holidays called pulled ham. Anybody heard of pulled ham? We think about pulled pork all the time, but he took a boneless ham, put it on the smoker, got it up to 250 degrees, right? Slow smoke, and then it just shreds, and it's tender, and they're gonna do that item for a holiday item, and they're also gonna do something with pork belly. So it's really identifying, how do we get those items in front of operators, and then how do we get them and de-risk it slightly with the opportunity to put it on the menu. So if there's, and we're gonna have some extra time here for questions, but if there's three things I wanna leave you with, it's these three things, right? More people are eating more pork. What do we say up front? What's most important? More households eating more pork more often. That's the mantra. And I will say more people paying a higher price for pork more often is kind of my mantra when I talk to producers. The campaign is evolving. We launched last May, so we're 9 months in, and we're optimizing as we navigate through these waters. So Jose talked about the new Hispanic campaign. Him and I were in Chicago last week with a Hispanic retailer that has stores in Chicago, in Dallas, and in Los Angeles and Phoenix. So you're gonna see the campaign come to life in different ways, but we're really focused on how do we have the biggest impact. And then our retail partners are all in. Every conversation I've had is, we want to lean in. We want to use the assets that National Pork Board has. And those are your assets, right? I mean, it's through the checkoff investment that we've invested the dollars into the assets, but retailers are looking at the category different. They're reaching out to us, and I've got retailers that I've been introduced to through a packer, right? We've got a small team, so we focus on the top 10, then we've got the next 10, but then there's the next 10 below that. Last week I was in Boston with BJ's. Anybody ever heard of BJ's Wholesale Club? They're similar to a Sam's Club or a Costco, but they are very engaged and looking forward to how we move the needle forward. So appreciate the time, appreciate talking about the work. I mean, Jose are just two of the people on the team driving the work, but it's exciting to do the work on your behalf and really move the needle for the pork category. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. And we've got a couple mics if we need to roam around with the mic. We got a roamer? Or I can be a roamer. Kind of like that Instant Pot. You gotta figure out how to turn it on. Probably need bacon.
Test.
So I know it's kind of a hot topic, but with the developing of AI, a lot of college kids like ourselves go onto AI and ask it to give us a ingredients list to go shopping, to make a quick crock pot meal. Are you guys doing ads with the different artificial intelligences? Because they do allow that. So are you kind of trying to get into that target market too? Because I kind of just follow it to the list and pick whatever ounces it says to go with.
I'm going to let Jose take that one.
It's a great question. AI is everywhere. I mean, there's no denying that. At the moment, we're not. And one of the things that pork shines is being an authentic protein, right? It's all about being relevant, authentic, and we're just at the moment not ready for that. I mean, I think consumers, if you scan social media at the moment, you know when something's fake, right? So the question is, do you use it to create content and have something out there that's not real, undermining the authenticity of the product, or do you leverage it in different ways to, whether it's capturing, be more efficient with performance and things along those lines? So it's a balance. I know our organization, right, Sally, we have been talking about the AI. How do we leverage it in terms of bringing it to the campaign in a way that makes sense behind the scenes? But in terms of content creation, that's a fine balance, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's not real. And do you want to start saying, well, look at this ad, it's not real, pork is not real, and then we start getting into this negativity of things, right? So I think AI is moving quickly. We are keeping tabs on it, but we're not there yet to deploy something just for the sake of deploying it to get on the bandwagon.
So that's on my fault. I didn't specify my question quite right. So when we go into this AI browser and say, make me a meal, so I can go grocery shop. Are you guys putting in funding towards
Gotcha.
the AI machines to say, here's a great pork recipe instead of chicken?
Not at the moment, but we are working with an AI partner, or thinking about how we can start feeding some of that. So thank you for the clarification. Something that we expect probably something like that will happen in the near future.
Other questions? Maddie?
What have you done so far that has not worked, and how have you pivoted then to adjust?
So we did this, we had a tactic around this gaming, a lot of younger consumers engaging in the gaming space. And we put some dollars behind that, and we were just not seeing the results, period. It lasted about 4 months, and sometimes you think about, well, it's got to marinate there, right? It's got to optimize and things like that, but it was just not working. So we killed that. That's one example. Let's see what else we've done.
I'll give you one, Maddie. Working with Publix down in Florida, right? They've got 1,400 stores. We did a cross promotion with a company called Reese's. So Reese's is, they've got Bistro Main Street sides. So we did a label that was on pack. It was save $1 off of Reese's with the purchase of pork, right? We funded some of the fixed costs of the promotion, but I literally had a conversation with Publix last week. I'm like, what were the results? They said, well, we saw a decent lift on Reese's. We didn't really see it move the needle for pork. And I said, well, then we'll shift those dollars, right? It's really finding with those retail partners, what are the tactics that are going to drive sales? Because at the end of the day, if we don't drive sales, then it's not worth doing. So I literally had that conversation with the Reese's sales guy yesterday as well, saying, I don't think we're going to do that tactic again. But I've always operated in the mindset, and long before I came to the pork board, right, it's don't be afraid to fail quickly, right? Because everything isn't going to work, but take those opportunities to adjust. And that's really, like, we've got a lot of our companies that we work with and they optimize on the back end from a targeting standpoint, right? And it's learning and optimizing and then shifting if we need to make a shift.
Yeah. We've done some things too on social where, you spend the resources to create awesome content, and then it's not gaining traction, right? So we're putting a lot of content out there. So we say, okay, so let's create fewer content that is more impactful, and then let's put some money behind it so it goes wider and broader, right? So we stopped doing that and kind of tweak our strategy to make sure that we're being pretty smart about how we deploy our dollars versus just continuing to do that and not see the results. So that's another example.
stand over here because I feel like this is.
Jose, you referenced a shift away from fresh and focusing on processed and ingredients. With the recent dietary guideline changes and the focus or headwinds on ultra-processed foods, I see a lot of our pork items fit in the processed category in many of the consumers' minds. Can you address some of the thoughts that you guys have had, how we're gonna navigate some of that headwind with ultra-processed?
Well, we have a team in nutrition that's all over that. Those guidelines just kind of came up recently. We're not walking away from fresh. We're actually, we have a whole hog approach in terms of catering both the processed and the fresh side. So we're doubling down on nutrition. We have a nutrition team. We're looking to even potentially even expand that as well to really account for that. You think about the child nutrition, it's a big deal, right, at schools. You know, pork is a nutrient-dense protein, and it should fit into everybody's meal, right? Like, we're not going to change that. I think there's a huge opportunity for us. At the moment, we're navigating some of those things because we're putting kind of like our strategy forward with our nutrition team. And I think I saw here, well, no, she was not here. But more to come on that, Terry. I mean, I think we're still trying to develop what that looks like, but we're not going to shy away from that. Our team is all over that. I know we're looking into that military or the child nutrition thing with school boards, kind of trying to kill all the lunches. In Chicago, for example, there's 350,000 students in that school district where pork doesn't have a presence. And so how do we navigate that? So those are things that are coming all as part of this dietary guidelines and the opportunity. We have a huge opportunity right now. The time is now to really address that. And so our team is all over that. So we'll report back on that to see what that looks like, Terry.
Jamie, you didn't know you were going to get your steps in today.
Was a little surprised to hear that, and maybe it's not the case, that the majority of the push is pork board to the retailer saying this is how you should market this product. When you look at the value of the carcass and the retailer is taking home the lion's share of that value, how much of that is coming from the retailer back saying this is how we want the product processed or prepared or whatever when it hits the retail case?
The retail space is very unique, right? There are very few retailers that are cutting in store anymore, right? There's a lot of case-ready programs where the assortment is, one, it's driven by the retailer, but having been on the packer side, I understand the dynamics of there's 20, 30,000 pigs coming today and tomorrow and the next day, and it's all about how efficiently do we get product through the plants. We did host an innovation summit this last fall in partnership with Century 21 Pork and the U.S. Soy Board. So there's discussion happening today on how do we continue to evolve the value of the whole carcass, right? We had a loin complex task force, and we've been beating our head against the wall with the loin for the last 40 years, and we're really taking a different approach to that. But it's how do you drive the retailer to think different about the product? And Jose, I'm going to bring up the example, the conversation with Scott at Tony's in Chicago, right? Thinking about, I've had two retailers say, man, I want to focus on shoulders this year. And if 99 cents, man, if I can just get bone-in shoulders for 99 cents, and it's this idea of how do you flip them to think different? How do you take that shoulder and pull off the copa? Matt, where are you at? I know you were in here. You must have left. But pull off the copa and sell that for a higher value. Put the rest of it in a sausage and sell it for a higher value. So it's really trying to shift that mindset from a retailer standpoint. But the other thing I'll tell you about retailers is old habits die really hard. They want to look at doing something different, but then they also say, "What I'm up against what I did last year." So continuing down that path. And I hope that answered your question.
good?
I think we're good.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, appreciate your time. We'll be here as well, so if you want to, come up and ask individual questions, we'll certainly be willing to have the conversation, but thank you. Appreciate all you guys do.